I never intended to become the eye of a storm. Standing at the window of my small apartment overlooking the snow-dusted Colorado mountains, I can still feel the acid burn of humiliation crawling up my throat when I remember Captain Thomas Grayson's smirk, the way his eyes narrowed as he thrust the silver tray of champagne flutes into my hands, the way the other officers' laughter buzzed like hornets around my head. "This is what women are good at, serving drinks," he had said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My name is Rachel Lawson, and I'm a 29-year-old Air Force officer who has spent years proving myself in a world that constantly asks me to prove my worth. I've navigated countless slights, microaggressions, and blatant dismissals with my head held high. But sometimes, even the strongest walls crumble under persistent rain. This is the story of how I chose dignity over revenge, silence over rage, and how that choice created a reckoning I never anticipated. This is about the emptiest banquet hall in Air Force Academy history, a general's fury, and how the quietest response can sometimes be the most devastating, because sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to simply step aside and let someone's own actions speak for themselves. The Colorado winter had settled into its rhythm, painting the Academy grounds in crisp whites and blues. December brought with it the annual holiday banquet, a prestigious affair where officers gathered to celebrate the year's achievements under sparkling lights and the watchful eyes of high command. I had been looking forward to it, not just as a social gathering, but as an opportunity to showcase the logistics project I'd been spearheading. 6 months of analyzing supply chain efficiencies had resulted in a model that could save the Air Force millions. This was my chance to be seen not just as Lieutenant Rachel Lawson, but as an officer whose contributions mattered. My best friend Grace Miller caught me checking my reflection in the women's bathroom mirror before the pre-banquet meeting. "You look like you're heading into battle, not a party planning session," she said, adjusting her perfectly pressed uniform. I smoothed a stray hair back into my tight bun. "Maybe I am. Grayson's going to be there." Grace's smile faltered. "Just keep your distance. You know how he gets." Captain Thomas Grayson. Just thinking about him made my shoulders tense. Since his promotion 6 months ago, he'd made it his personal mission to remind me of what he called my proper place. Behind every female officer's success, he believed, was a man allowing it to happen. The conference room was already half full when we arrived. I took a seat near Lieutenant Colonel Warren, hoping to discuss my presentation for the banquet. But before I could even open my mouth, Grayson's voice boomed across the room. "Lieutenant Lawson, perfect timing. We need someone with a woman's touch for the banquet." Every eye in the room turned toward me. I maintained my composure, years of training kicking in automatically. "Sir, I was hoping to discuss the logistics presentation Presentation? Grayson's laugh cut me off, sharp as a blade. "We don't need another boring PowerPoint. What we need is someone to coordinate the refreshments and make sure the general's officers are properly attended to." I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest. "With all due respect, sir, that's not my area of expertise. Perhaps the event coordinator—" "Are you refusing a direct order, Lieutenant?" His voice dropped an octave, the threat unmistakable. The room grew silent. 20 faces watched, some with discomfort, others with barely concealed amusement. I could feel Grace's supportive gaze, but also her silent warning not to push back too hard. "No, sir," I said, the words like ash in my mouth. "Excellent!" Grayson smiled, victory gleaming in his eyes. He walked over and picked up a silver serving tray from the side table, striding toward me with deliberate steps. The room seemed to hold its breath as he placed it in my hands. "You can start practicing now," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what women are good at, serving drinks." Laughter rippled through the room, not from everyone, but enough to make my cheeks burn. My hands gripped the tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. I looked down, at my reflection in the silver surface, distorted, diminished. "The banquet is in 3 weeks," he continued. 25 officers, including General Pierce. "I expect perfection, Lieutenant. After all, we can't have you messing up what you were born to do." More laughter. I stood frozen, the weight of the tray nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. "Dismissed," Grayson said, turning away, as if I'd already disappeared. I placed the tray on the table with mechanical precision and walked out of the room, back straight, face impassive. Grace caught up to me in the hallway, her expression a storm of fury. "That complete ass," she hissed. "You should report him." "To whom?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. "He's careful. It's always just borderline enough to be dismissed as leadership style or military tradition." Grace placed her hand on my arm. What are you going to do? I looked out the window at the mountains standing tall against the horizon. My father's voice echoed in my head. Rachel, true honor isn't about the medals on your chest. It's about standing tall when others try to make you small. I'm going to do what he would never expect, I said quietly. Nothing. Nothing? Grace's eyebrows shot up. Not nothing, I corrected myself. Something else entirely. That night, I sat at my small desk, staring at my computer screen. The holiday banquet was scheduled for December 18th. I pulled up my calendar and noted that the Veterans Holiday event in Fort Lauderdale, the one I'd been invited to speak at months ago, was on the same date. I had declined the Florida invitation with regret, explaining my duties at the academy. But now, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. What I was considering wasn't technically insubordination. I was entitled to request emergency leave, and I had never formally accepted responsibility for Grayson's banquet. He had simply assigned it to me in a room full of witnesses. I thought of my father, his quiet dignity, his belief that true leadership wasn't about forcing others into submission, but lifting them up. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my pride, worked twice as hard, only to be reduced to a stereotype. With sudden clarity, I made my decision. I typed up my emergency leave request, citing a family situation in Florida. Then I sent an email to the veterans group accepting their speaking invitation. The reply came within hours. We're honored to have you, Lieutenant Lawson. The veterans are looking forward to hearing from you. I closed my laptop and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, my leave was approved without question. Grayson was away at a conference, and the paperwork had gone through proper channels. By the time he returned, I would be long gone. On my last day before leave, Grace cornered me in the cafeteria. You're up to something, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I can see it in your eyes. I took a sip of coffee. I'm taking emergency leave. What? When? Tomorrow. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. Grace's eyes widened. But the banquet is not officially my responsibility, I finished for her. Grayson never filed the proper assignment. He just announced it in a room. Understanding dawned on Grace's face, followed by a slow smile. He's going to lose his mind. Perhaps, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Or perhaps he'll find someone else to serve his drinks. I didn't tell her the rest, about the Florida invitation, about my speech. Some cards were better held close to the chest. The next morning, as my plane lifted off from Denver International, I watched the Rocky Mountains recede in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not because I was running away, but because I was choosing my own path. Little did I know that my quiet decision would create a tsunami back at the academy, one that would wash away more than just a holiday banquet. The Florida air hit me like a warm embrace as I stepped out of Fort Lauderdale International Airport. After the dry chill of Colorado, the humidity wrapped around me like a living thing, carrying scents of salt water and flowering trees. I shed my heavy coat and took a deep breath, allowing myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in months. Freedom. My rental car hummed along the coastal highway, palm trees, swaying against a brilliant blue sky. I had 3 days before the veterans event, 3 days to decompress, to remember who I was beyond the constraints of my uniform, and Captain Grayson's demeaning expectations. The small beachside hotel I'd booked was nothing fancy, but its simplicity was exactly what I needed. A room with a balcony overlooking the ocean, the constant rhythm of waves against shore, and absolute anonymity. No one here knew Lieutenant Rachel Lawson. No one had expectations. No one was waiting for me to fail. As I unpacked my civilian clothes, jeans, and light cotton shirts that felt almost foreign after weeks in uniform, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Grayson's looking for you. Asked where you'd gone. Told him I had no idea. Stay strong. I smiled, picturing his confusion turning to anger. He would have returned from his conference expecting to find me properly cowed, ready to play waitress at his command. Instead, he would have found my empty office and an approved leave request he couldn't override. Another text came through. He's asking about the banquet preparations. No one knows anything. I put the phone down without responding. It wasn't my responsibility to fix this situation. For once, Captain Grayson would have to face the consequences of his own actions, or rather, his lack of action, because I knew for certain he had made absolutely no preparations for the banquet himself. He had simply assumed I would do it all, despite never giving me official authority or resources. That evening, I sat on the beach watching the sunset paint, the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. An older couple walking by smiled at me, and I realized I was smiling too. A real smile, not the tight, professional one I'd been wearing like armor. My father used to say that dignity wasn't something others could take from you. It was something you could only surrender. I had come dangerously close to surrendering mine, but sitting on that Florida beach, miles away from the academy, I felt it returning to me like the tide coming in. The next morning, I drove to the Veterans Center to meet with the event coordinator. The building was modest but well-maintained, with flags flying proudly at the entrance. Inside, framed photographs of service members from various eras lined the walls, a visual timeline of sacrifice and honor. Martha Jenkins, a brisk woman, in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Lieutenant Lawson, we're thrilled you could make it after all. When you initially declined, we understood completely." "Plans change," I said simply. "I'm honored to be here." She led me through the center, introducing me to staff and volunteers preparing for the holiday event. Unlike the Academy's formal banquet, this gathering had a warmth to it. Handmade decorations, potluck sign-up sheets, and veterans of all ages pitching in where they could. "We've got about 50 attendees confirmed," Martha explained, showing me the small stage area where I would speak. "Mostly local vets, some family members. Nothing fancy, but it means the world to them." "It means the world to me too," I said, and meant it. As we walked, an elderly man using a walker approached us. His weathered face broke into a smile, revealing a missing tooth. "You must be the Air Force lady," he said, extending a trembling hand. "Charlie Wilson, Army, Vietnam." I shook his hand gently. "Lieutenant Rachel Lawson. It's an honor, sir. Heard you're giving a talk. Don't make it too fancy now." He winked. "Just tell us something real." Something real. The word stayed with me as I returned to my hotel to work on my speech. What was real wasn't my title or rank or the projects I managed. What was real was the core of service, the reason I joined in the first place, the values my father had instilled in me long before I put on a uniform. I opened my laptop and began to write, not about logistics or efficiency models, but about dignity, resilience, and respect in uniform. About how true leadership lifts others up rather than diminishes them. About how service isn't defined by who gives orders and who takes them, but by a shared commitment to something greater than ourselves. By evening, I had a draft I felt good about. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was honest. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony, watching stars appear one by one above the darkening ocean. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Grace. "Shit's hitting the fan. Grayson called emergency meeting about banquet. No one has any idea what's happening. He's freaking out but won't admit it." I could picture it clearly. Grayson, red-faced and desperate, trying to maintain his authority while realizing he had absolutely no plan. The banquet was just over 2 weeks away, and nothing, venue confirmation, catering, decorations, program, had been arranged. Another text followed. "He still thinks you're coming back to handle it. Told everyone you're temporarily indisposed. Pretty sure he hasn't even read your leave request details." I felt a twinge of something, not guilt exactly, but awareness of the storm brewing back home. For a moment, I considered calling in, offering some guidance, some list of contacts or suggestions. But then I remembered Grayson's smirk as he handed me that silver tray, the laughter that followed, the systematic way he had tried to reduce me to less than I was. No, this was his responsibility. His failure would be of his own making. I texted back a single line to Grace. "Take care of yourself. I'll be back when my leave ends." The next day, I threw myself into helping with the veterans event. I stuffed envelopes, hung decorations, and listened to stories from men and women whose service spanned decades. Their experiences, the triumphs and tragedies, the humor and horror, put my own struggles into perspective. A retired female colonel named Diane took me under her wing, sharing coffee and stories about being one of the first women in her unit in the 1980s. "They didn't know what to do with us back then," she chuckled. "Some of them still don't. But you don't change minds by shouting. You change them by being so damn good they can't ignore you. Even when they try their hardest to do just that?" I asked. She patted my hand. "Especially then, Lieutenant. Especially then." As the day for the veterans event approached, I found myself actually looking forward to it. Not as a statement or a revenge plot against Grayson, but as an opportunity to connect with the deeper purpose of my service. The morning of December 18th dawned clear and bright in Florida. I dressed carefully in my formal uniform, checking each medal and insignia in the mirror. My speech was ready, my heart steady. Meanwhile, 1,300 miles away in Colorado, I knew a very different scene was unfolding, one I couldn't have orchestrated better if I'd tried. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the officer's composure I'd perfected over years, a small part of me smiled at the thought. Back in Denver, the snow fell in gentle flakes outside the Academy's grand banquet hall. Inside, according to what I would later learn, chaos reigned. Captain Thomas Grayson stood in the center of an empty room that should have been transformed into a winter wonderland. No twinkling lights adorned the ceiling. No centerpieces graced the bare tables. No catering staff bustled in the kitchen. Just 25 round tables with white cloths standing like ghosts in the vast space. The first officers began arriving at 1800 hours, dressed in their formal blues, their spouses in evening wear. They entered the hall expecting music, warmth, and celebration. Instead, they found Grayson barking orders at two bewildered junior officers who had been drafted at the last minute to help. "Where are the decorations?" demanded Colonel Simmons, one of the first to arrive. "Coming shortly," Grayson lied, tugging at his collar. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the December chill. By 1830, the hall had filled with confused officers and their guests. The tables remained empty. The bar stood unmanned. The podium at the front had no microphone. Whispers began circulating through the room, growing louder as minutes ticked by. "Captain, where is the catering staff?" asked Major Phillips, his wife standing beside him in an elegant gown that had clearly cost more than my monthly salary. "There's been a slight delay," Grayson stammered. "Weather issues." The weather in Denver was clear, with only light snow, nowhere near enough to delay catering. At precisely 1900 hours, General Douglas Pierce arrived with his wife, a decorated combat veteran with a legendary reputation for both fairness and exacting standards. Pierce had been looking forward to this evening. It was his first holiday season at the Academy, and he'd spoken often about the importance of tradition and celebration in military life. The general stepped into the hall and paused, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. Officers standing awkwardly around bare tables, no food, no music, and Grayson in the center looking as though he might be ill. "Captain Grayson?" The general's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "A word!" Those close enough reported that the general's face remained impassive as Grayson approached, but his words were clear enough for several to hear. "Captain, where is the food you promised my officers?" Grayson's response was too quiet to make out, but the general's reply was not. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Meanwhile, in Fort Lauderdale, I stood before a room of veterans and their families, the weight of their attention both humbling and empowering. The community hall was modest compared to the Academy's grand facilities, but it glowed with warmth. Holiday decorations crafted by local schoolchildren, tables laden with home-cooked food, and faces eager to connect. Lieutenant, Lawson served in Afghanistan and has since distinguished herself in operational planning. Martha introduced me, her voice carrying genuine pride. "We're honored she could join us today." I stepped up to the small podium, surveying the room. Elderly veterans in wheelchairs, middle-aged men and women with service pins on their lapels, young family members there to support their loved ones. No stars or silver eagles on collars here, but more courage and sacrifice than many high-ranking officers I knew. "Thank you for having me," I began. "When I put on this uniform each morning, I'm reminded of something my father, also an Air Force officer, taught me, that the fabric itself means nothing without the integrity of the person wearing it." The room was silent, attentive in a way that had nothing to do with rank or protocol and everything to do with shared understanding. In my years of service, I've learned that true leadership isn't measured by how many people follow your orders, but by how many people you lift up along the way. It's not about making others feel small to make yourself feel big. It's about recognizing the dignity in every person who serves, regardless of rank, gender, or background. As I spoke, I felt something shifting inside me, a return to the core values that had led me to join the Air Force in the first place. This wasn't about Grayson or his banquet. It was about something far more fundamental, the difference between power and leadership, between compliance and respect. After my speech, I joined the veterans in serving meals, listening to stories, and sharing laughter. An Associated Press photographer covering the event snapped several photos of me in uniform, helping an elderly veteran navigate the buffet line, deep in conversation with a group of female veterans spanning 3 generations of service. Charlie, the Vietnam veteran I'd met earlier, gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You're one of the good ones," he said, his rheumy eyes holding mine. "Don't let the bastards grind you down." I smiled, thinking how my professional mask had slipped just enough to let authentic connection flow. I won't, sir. Promise. Back in Colorado, the situation had devolved from awkward to disastrous. With no food forthcoming and no explanation that satisfied the increasingly hungry and irritated officers, Grayson was cornered by General Pierce, in front of the entire gathering. "Captain, I want to know exactly what happened here," the general demanded, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "This is an embarrassment to the Academy." Grayson, desperate to save face, made his fatal mistake. "Sir, I had assigned Lieutenant Lawson to coordinate this event, but she abandoned her post without proper handoff procedures. She requested emergency leave at the last minute, leaving us in this unfortunate position." The general's aide, Captain Jennifer Riley, stepped forward. "Sir, if I may." She handed the general a folder. Pierce opened it, his expression darkening as he read. "This leave request was submitted 3 weeks ago, Captain Grayson, and approved through proper channels 2.5 weeks ago. Are you telling me you made no contingency plans in that time?" Grayson's face paled further. "Sir, I wasn't aware of the specifics of her leave. I assumed—" "You assumed," the general cut him off. "And yet, there is no official record of Lieutenant Lawson being assigned to this event. No requisition forms, no budget allocation, no planning documents with her name attached." The truth was dawning on everyone present. Grayson had never officially tasked me with the banquet. He had simply announced it in a meeting, assuming I would comply without question. "Furthermore," the general continued, looking at another document in the folder, "Lieutenant Lawson is currently representing the Air Force as a keynote speaker at a veterans event in Florida, an engagement she was invited to months ago." The hall fell, completely silent. Officers exchanged glances, some beginning to understand what had truly occurred. At that moment, Captain Riley's phone chimed with an alert. She glanced at it, then handed it to the general. On the screen was a news article just published by the Associated Press. "Air Force Lieutenant honors veterans at Florida holiday event." The accompanying photo showed me in full dress, uniform, speaking passionately to a room full of attentive veterans. General Pierce looked from the phone to Grayson, his expression unreadable. "It appears Lieutenant Lawson is fulfilling her duties admirably, Captain. I suggest you explain exactly why you misrepresented her role in this fiasco." Grayson had no answer. His carefully constructed narrative was collapsing around him, exposed by nothing more than the truth and my simple choice to be elsewhere. The general turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this evening's disappointment. Please consider yourselves dismissed. We will reschedule a proper celebration after the new year." As officers and their guests filed out, many were already checking their phones, viewing the AP photos now circulating on social media. Images of me serving those who had served while they stood in an empty banquet hall with rumbling stomachs. That night, as I sat on my hotel balcony watching the Florida stars, my phone buzzed with texts from Grace. "Holy shit," read the first one. Then, "Total disaster. No food, no nothing. Grayson tried to blame you. Pierce had your leave docs. Then the AP pics dropped. And, finally, you're a genius. Accidental or deliberate, you're a freaking genius." I didn't respond. This wasn't about genius or revenge. It was about choosing dignity when someone tried to take it from me. About standing tall when someone tried to make me small. And sometimes standing tall meant simply stepping aside and letting the truth speak for itself. The morning after the veterans event, I woke to find my phone overflowing with notifications. The AP story had been picked up by military news sites and shared widely across social media platforms. My inbox contained messages from fellow officers I hadn't spoken to in years, most expressing admiration for my speech in Florida, a few offering cryptic congratulations I didn't quite understand. I scrolled through them while sipping coffee. On my balcony, the Florida sun warming my face. One email caught my attention, from Colonel Diana Reeves, the retired officer I'd met at the Veterans Center. "Lieutenant Lawson," it read, "I've received several calls about you this morning from old Academy friends. Seems there was quite a situation in Denver last night. Whatever happened, hold your head high. You represented the best of us in Florida." I frowned, wondering just how far the story had traveled and in what form. I had no regrets about my choice, but I hadn't intended to create a spectacle. My goal had been quiet dignity, not public humiliation for Grayson, deserved though it might be. My phone rang. "Grace, are you watching the fallout?" she asked without preamble. "It's nuclear." "I've seen some messages," I said. Cautiously. "How bad is it?" Bad for Grayson, you mean? I could hear the smile in her voice. The general has ordered a formal inquiry. Turns out there was never a catering order placed, no entertainment booked, not even a sound system reserved. Grayson had literally done nothing except tell you to handle it all, without giving you any authority or budget to do so. I closed my eyes, imagining the chaos. And he blamed me. Tried to, but the general had your leave request right there, showing you followed all proper protocols. And then that AP photo dropped like a bomb. You, in full dress uniform, delivering a keynote speech to veterans while we all stood around starving in an empty hall. That wasn't intentional, I said, though even to my own ears it sounded unlikely. Grace's laugh echoed through the phone. Sure it wasn't. Either way, the contrast couldn't be more perfect. Grayson trying to paint you as a derelict officer while photographic evidence showed you honoring the service in Florida. Even better, someone dug up the recording of that meeting where he handed you that serving tray. My stomach clenched. There's a recording? Academy security cameras, with audio. The general's aide requisitioned it after Grayson tried to blame you. Let's just say the context of his women are good at serving drinks. Comment isn't playing well in 2025. I sat down heavily on the balcony chair. This was escalating beyond anything I'd imagined. What had been a personal stand for dignity was transforming into a very public reckoning. What happens now? I asked. You enjoy the rest of your leave, Grace said firmly. And when you come back, you walk in with your head high. You did nothing wrong, Rachel. Nothing. After hanging up, I spent the day walking along the beach, trying to process everything. The gentle rhythm of waves against shore helped calm my racing thoughts. I hadn't sought revenge, hadn't plotted Grayson's downfall. I'd simply removed myself from an untenable situation and chosen to serve in a way that honored my values. Yet consequences were unfolding like dominoes, set in motion by nothing more than the truth revealing itself. There was a certain poetic justice in it, I had to admit. That evening, an email from General Pierce appeared in my inbox. Its subject line simple: request for meeting. My heart raced as I opened it. Scanning the eye. Brief formal message asking me to report to his office upon my return from leave. No indication of its purpose, no hint of his perspective on the situation. Just a standard request that somehow felt weighted with significance. The remaining days of my leave passed in a strange limbo. I continued volunteering at the Veterans Center, finding solace in meaningful work and genuine connections. Several of the veterans had seen the news coverage and treated me with a knowing respect that was somehow more uncomfortable than the camaraderie we'd shared before. Heard you caused quite a stir back at your base, Charlie commented one afternoon as I helped him organize donation boxes. Not intentionally, I said, focusing on folding a blanket. His weathered hand paused my movements. Intent isn't always the point, Lieutenant. Sometimes the universe just needs a little nudge to set things right. I smiled despite myself. Is that what I did? Nudge the universe? Seems that way. He winked. And from what I hear, it needed nudging. The day before my return to Colorado, I received another text from Grace. Grayson's been temporarily relieved of duty pending investigation. Full formal why? Inquiry into conduct unbecoming and misuse of authority. The news should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a strange hollowness. This wasn't what I'd wanted. Not revenge or punishment, just respect. The right to do my job without being diminished. The chance to contribute based on my abilities rather than gender stereotypes. As my plane lifted off from Fort Lauderdale the next morning, I watched the coastline recede, taking with it the peace I'd found there. Ahead lay uncertainty, a meeting with General Pierce, colleagues who had witnessed Grayson's humiliation, and the uncomfortable spotlight of attention I'd never sought. The flight gave me hours to prepare, to rehearse explanations and justifications. But in the end, I decided on the simplest approach. The truth. I would neither apologize for following proper protocols, nor gloat over Grayson's downfall. I would simply stand in my integrity and let that speak for itself. Landing in Denver felt like returning to a different world. The familiar mountains stood sentinel against the sky, but everything else seemed shifted somehow, as if the landscape of my professional life had been fundamentally altered during my absence. Grace was waiting for me at the arrival gate, her smile a welcome sight in the sea of strangers. "Welcome back, hero," she said, pulling me into a hug. I stiffened. "Don't call me that. I'm no hero." She stepped back, studying my face. "Maybe not to yourself, but to every female officer who's been told to serve drinks while the men do the real work? Yeah, you kind of are. That wasn't my intention," I insisted as we walked toward the parking garage. Intentions aside, things are different now, Grace said. The general's aide has been gathering statements about Grayson's behavior patterns. Turns out you weren't the only one he was treating like that, just the only one who stood up to him. The weight of this settled on my shoulders. Responsibility I hadn't asked for, a role I hadn't sought. Catalyst for change. Accidental revolutionary. Reluctant symbol. Your meeting with the general is at 0900 tomorrow, Grace continued as we drove through the snow-covered streets. Any idea what you're going to say? I watched the familiar landmarks of Colorado Springs pass by, grounding myself in their solidity. The truth, that's all. That night, I stood at my apartment window looking out at the mountains, coming full circle to where this story began. The same view, the same person, and yet, everything had changed. My uniform hung pressed and perfect for tomorrow's meeting, metals aligned with precision. I touched the fabric, remembering my words to the veterans in Florida. The uniform means nothing without the integrity of the person wearing it. Tomorrow, I would wear it with the full weight of that integrity. Not as a shield or a weapon, but as a reminder of who I was and what I stood for. The universe had indeed been nudged. Now I had to live with wherever it settled. The academy grounds were quiet at 08:45 hours as I made my way to the administration building. Fresh snow crunched beneath my boots, the cold air sharp in my lungs. Officers and cadets I passed nodded, respectfully, some with curiosity in their eyes, others with something that looked unsettlingly like admiration. News had traveled fast, morphing into various versions of the story, each with its own embellishments. According to Grace, some claimed I'd orchestrated the entire situation as an elaborate lesson in respect. Others suggested I'd been secretly working with the general to expose Grayson's behavior. None captured the simple truth. I had chosen dignity over humiliation, and the rest had unfolded on its own. General Pierce's aide, Captain Riley, met me in the outer office. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "The general is ready for you, Lieutenant," she said, leading me to the imposing oak door. Before opening it, she paused. "For what it's worth, that was a beautiful speech you gave in Florida." I blinked in surprise. "You watched it?" "Everyone has," she replied with a small smile. The Veterans Center uploaded the full video. Over 2 million views already. Before I could process this new information, she opened the door, and I was standing face to face with General Douglas Pierce. The general's office matched his reputation. Austere, organized, impressive without, being showy. A wall of commendations and photographs documented a distinguished career spanning 3 decades. He stood as I entered, his posture as precise as if he were on a parade ground rather than behind a desk. "Lieutenant Lawson," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, sir," I replied, sitting at attention, spine straight, hands resting on my knees. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the circumstances surrounding the holiday banquet incident," he began, his voice matter-of-fact. "I've also watched your address at the veterans event in Florida. Quite a contrast." I remained silent, waiting. "Would you care to explain your version of events?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "Sir, I was invited to speak at the veterans event months ago, but declined due to academy obligations. After Captain Grayson informally assigned me to serve refreshments at the holiday banquet, I reconsidered the Florida invitation. I submitted a proper leave request, which was approved through standard channels. I then accepted the speaking engagement." "And you didn't inform Captain Grayson directly?" "No, sir. My leave, request went through the proper administrative channels. I assumed he would be notified through the system." The general leaned back slightly. "An interesting assumption, given that you knew he was expecting you to coordinate the banquet." I met his gaze steadily. "Sir, Captain Grayson never formally assigned me that duty. There was no written order, no budget allocation, no authority granted to make the necessary arrangements. He simply announced it in a room full of officers after making his views on my capabilities clear." "Yes, I've seen the recording," the general said, his expression darkening slightly. His comment about women serving drinks was inappropriate. "It was consistent with his pattern of behavior, sir." The general raised an eyebrow. "A pattern you never reported." "With respect, sir, reporting microaggressions often does more damage to the reporter than the perpetrator. I chose to focus on my work and let my performance speak for itself." He nodded slowly, seeming to weigh my words. "And yet, Your decision to take leave at that particular time could be interpreted as retaliatory. This was the moment of truth. I could offer excuses, frame my actions as coincidental, or I could be honest. Sir, I won't pretend the timing was entirely coincidental. I was faced with a choice between serving as a waitress at an event where my professional contributions had been dismissed, or speaking as a respected officer at a veterans gathering. I chose the option that allowed me to maintain my dignity while still serving with honor. I paused, then added, I did not, however, anticipate or intend the consequences for Captain Grayson or the banquet. My goal was simply to remove myself from a demeaning situation. The general's eyes never left mine as I spoke. When I finished, he remained silent for several long seconds. A remarkable feat of precision targeting for someone who claims no intentional consequences, Lieutenant, he finally said, though his tone held no accusation. Your absence created a perfect vacuum that exposed Captain Grayson's failures of leadership. The truth has a way of revealing itself, sir. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Indeed it does. He opened a folder on his desk. Captain Grayson is currently facing a formal inquiry. Multiple officers have come forward with similar accounts of inappropriate conduct, particularly toward female officers. His future at this academy is, at best, uncertain. I felt no triumph at this news, only a quiet sadness that such intervention had been necessary. As for you, Lieutenant, the general continued, your record speaks for itself. Exemplary service, innovative logistics models that have saved the Air Force significant resources, and now, apparently, a gift for public speaking that resonates beyond military circles. He closed the folder and looked at me directly. The Academy needs officers who embody integrity and moral courage, who understand that leadership isn't about power, but about lifting others up. I believe those were your words in Florida? Yes, sir. I'm recommending you for promotion to captain, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical force. I had expected perhaps a reprimand for causing disruption, or at best a return to status quo. Promotion had never entered my mind. Sir, He held up a hand. This isn't about the banquet incident, Lieutenant. This is about your overall service record, your leadership potential, and yes, the integrity you demonstrated in a difficult situation. You chose to serve with honor rather than compromise your dignity. That's exactly the kind of officer we need in positions of greater responsibility. I struggled to find words. Thank you, sir. There will be a formal ceremony next week. In the meantime, he slid a folder across the desk. I'd like you to review these materials. The logistics efficiency model you developed has caught attention at the Pentagon. They're interested in implementing it more broadly, and they'd like you to lead the initiative. I accepted the folder with steady hands that belied my inner turmoil. This wasn't just a promotion. It was recognition, validation, a chance to contribute meaningfully based on my abilities, rather than navigate constant undermining. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't, Captain Lawson. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. One more thing. The rescheduled holiday celebration will take place next Friday. I expect you to attend. As a guest this time, not serving staff. Yes, sir. As I left the general's office, Captain Riley gave me a knowing smile. Congratulations, Captain, she said, emphasizing my new rank. News traveled at light speed on the base. By the time I reached my office, my inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Grace and other colleagues. I closed the door, needing a moment of quiet to process everything. The promotion, the Pentagon project, the public vindication. It was overwhelming, not because I didn't deserve these opportunities, but because I'd grown so accustomed to fighting for basic respect that recognition felt almost foreign. My father's words echoed in my mind. True honor isn't about the medals on your chest. It's about standing tall when others try to make you small. I had stood tall, not by fighting or shouting or demanding, but by quietly choosing my own path, by refusing to be diminished, by serving with integrity even when others tried to reduce me to less than I was. And somehow, that quiet choice had created ripples beyond anything I could have imagined. A knock at my door broke through my thoughts. Grace peeked in, her face split in an enormous grin. Captain Lawson, she said, her voice teasing but proud. Permission to hug a superior officer? I laughed, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. Permission granted, Lieutenant. As she wrapped me in a fierce embrace, I felt something settle within me. Not pride or vindication, but peace. The peace that comes from knowing you've stayed true to yourself through the storm. I told you. Grace whispered. I told you it would all work out. I nodded against her shoulder. Not quite how either of us expected, though. The best victories never are. The week leading up to my promotion ceremony passed. In a blur of congratulations, new responsibilities, and preparation for the Pentagon project, I dove into work with renewed energy, grateful for the opportunity to focus on meaningful contributions rather than navigating workplace politics. Captain Thomas Grayson remained conspicuously absent from the academy. Rumors circulated about his reassignment to a remote base in Alaska, though nothing had been officially announced. I deliberately avoided seeking information about his situation, preferring to focus on my own path forward rather than his downfall. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, the Colorado sun glinting off fresh snow. I stood before my mirror inspecting my dress uniform one final time, every button polished, every medal precisely aligned. My fingers traced the empty space where my new captain's bars would soon be pinned. A text from Grace lit up my phone. Ready for your big day, Captain Lawson? I smiled, typing back, as ready as I'll ever be. The ceremony was scheduled for 1100 hours in the Academy's formal hall, ironically, the same space where the ill-fated banquet was meant to take place. As I drove through the gates, I couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically circumstances had changed in just a few weeks. The hall had been transformed from the empty space of that infamous night into a dignified setting for military ceremony. Rows of chairs faced a small stage adorned with flags. Officers and cadets filled the seats, their uniforms creating a sea of blue. General Pierce stood at the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. Beside him, to my surprise, stood Colonel Diane Reeves, the retired female officer I'd befriended in Florida. I took my place at the side of the stage, heart pounding beneath my composed exterior. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a public acknowledgement that choosing dignity over degradation had been the right path. "Attention!" called the master of ceremonies, and the room rose as one standing at perfect attention. General Pierce stepped forward. Today we recognize exceptional service and leadership potential with the promotion of Lieutenant Rachel Lawson to the rank of captain. Lieutenant Lawson has distinguished herself through innovative logistics strategies that will save the Air Force millions in resources, exemplary operational planning, and a commitment to the core values that define our service. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Leadership is not measured merely by technical proficiency or tactical expertise, though Lieutenant Lawson possesses both in abundance. True leadership is demonstrated in moments of challenge, when integrity must be balanced with duty, when personal dignity intersects with service to others. My throat tightened as I recognized the echo of my own words from the Florida speech. Lieutenant Lawson, please step forward. I moved with measured steps to stand before the general, facing him with shoulders squared and chin lifted. Lieutenant Rachel Lawson, do you solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God? I do, sir, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion welling within me. He nodded to Colonel Reeves, who stepped forward with my captain's bars on a small cushion. Together they removed my lieutenant insignia and pinned the new rank to my shoulders. Congratulations, Captain Lawson, the general said, offering a crisp salute which I returned with equal precision. Colonel Reeves clasped my hand, her grip firm and warm. Well earned, she murmured. I turned to face the assembled officers and cadets, many of whom had witnessed Grayson's attempt to diminish me just weeks earlier. Now they stood, applauding as I received recognition not for serving drinks, but for serving with honor. Grace caught my eye from the front row, her face radiant with pride. Beside her sat several female cadets, their expressions a mixture of admiration and hope, as if my promotion represented possibility for their own futures. After the ceremony, a small reception offered the opportunity for congratulations and conversation. I found myself surrounded by colleagues eager to discuss the Pentagon logistics project or simply offer good wishes. Colonel Reeves pulled me aside briefly, her expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. I requested to be part of your ceremony specifically, she said. The general agreed immediately. I'm honored, ma'am. But may I ask why? She smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. Because 30 years ago, I faced my own captain, Grayson. I chose to fight, filed complaints, demanded hearings, made noise. It worked, eventually, but the cost was high. reputation as a troublemaker, passed over for opportunities, isolated from peers. She glanced around the room. What you did, choosing dignity without confrontation, letting truth speak for itself, that's a kind of courage I wish I'd understood back then. I wasn't trying to be courageous, I admitted, just trying to preserve my self-respect. That's often how the most powerful statements begin. She patted my arm. The Pentagon Project is just the beginning, Captain. Your path forward is bright, not because of what happened with Grayson, but because of who you are, regardless of him. As the reception wound down, General Pierce approached with a final piece of news. The rescheduled holiday celebration is tomorrow evening, Captain. I've made a slight adjustment to the program. I'd like you to say a few words, perhaps share some of the perspective you offered in Florida. Sir, this academy needs to hear it, he said simply. Not just about respect between genders, but about the fundamental nature of leadership and service. Your experience offers valuable insight. I nodded, both honored and daunted by the request. I'll prepare something appropriate, sir. That evening, I sat at my desk struggling to find the right words for tomorrow's speech. How to address what had happened without dwelling on it. How to speak truth without seeming vindictive. How to transform a personal experience into a universal lesson. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my breath caught. Congratulations on your promotion. You earned it long before the banquet incident. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Grayson. I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times to ensure I understood. This was unexpected. A private acknowledgement I never thought would come. After careful consideration, I typed a simple response. Thank you. Captain, I wish you well. No bitterness, no triumph, just acknowledgement and closure. With that exchange behind me, I returned to my speech with renewed clarity. This wasn't about Grayson or even about my own experience. It was about the larger truth that had emerged, about leadership, respect, and the quiet power of dignity. I wrote late into the night, crafting a message that I hoped would resonate beyond my personal story. When I finally set down my pen, I felt at peace with both what had happened and what lay ahead. The new insignia on my uniform represented not just a change in rank, but a new chapter in my journey, one defined not by others' limitations, but by my own strength and integrity. The rescheduled holiday celebration transformed the Academy's banquet hall beyond recognition. Elegant decorations in silver and blue adorned the walls and tables. A professional catering staff moved efficiently through the space, serving a feast that had been meticulously planned. Officers and their guests filled the room with conversation and laughter, creating the warm atmosphere that had been so painfully absent weeks before. I stood near the entrance, my newly adorned uniform drawing congratulatory nods and handshakes. The weight of the captain's bars on my shoulders still felt unfamiliar, yet perfectly right. Grace approached, stunning in her formal uniform. Quite a different scene from last time, wouldn't you say? I surveyed the room, taking in the contrast. Night and day. Nervous about your speech? She asked, nudging my shoulder gently. A little, I admitted. It's one thing to speak about leadership in Florida, far from everyone involved. It's another to address it here, where the wounds are still fresh. Grace smiled. That's exactly why it needs to be you. Anyone else would either ignore what happened or turn it into a cautionary tale about protocol. You'll speak truth with compassion. That's the goal, I said, straightening my shoulders. General Pierce approached, his wife beside him. Captain Lawson, you look well in those bars, he said with approval. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Pierce, an elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair, extended her hand. I've been looking forward to meeting you, Captain. Douglas has told me quite a bit about your handling of a difficult situation. I shook her hand, surprised by the warmth in her grip. All good things, I hope. He mentioned your speech in Florida inspired him to re-examine leadership practices at the Academy, she said. That's no small feat. Before I could respond, the Master of Ceremonies announced dinner would be served. I took my assigned seat at a table near the front, alongside several senior officers and their spouses. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed easily around topics ranging from upcoming deployments to holiday plans. No one directly mentioned the banquet fiasco or Grayson, though the undercurrent of awareness remained. After dessert had been served and coffee poured, General Pierce approached the podium. The room quieted immediately. Good evening, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly. First, let me say this celebration was worth waiting for. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. More importantly, let me thank each of you for your service this past year. The Academy continues to excel in its mission to develop leaders of character, and that excellence stems from your dedication. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Leadership isn't a static concept. It evolves as our understanding of human potential evolves. The best leaders recognize that growth requires both tradition and innovation, discipline and compassion, authority and humility. I felt the weight of his words, sensing where they led. Tonight, I've asked one of our officers to share some thoughts on leadership from a perspective that I believe deserves our attention. Captain Rachel Lawson recently addressed veterans in, Florida on this topic, and her insights merit a wider audience. He gestured toward me. Captain, please. I rose, smoothing my uniform as I approached the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes focused on me. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the moment. Thank you, General Pierce, I began, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. Leadership is a concept we discuss constantly in our profession. We study it, measure it, evaluate it, yet its essence often eludes simple definition. I looked out at the faces before me, senior officers who had wielded authority for decades, junior officers finding their way, spouses who supported the military life with its unique demands. My father, a career Air Force officer, told me something when I first joined that I've carried with me. True honor isn't about the medals on your chest. It's about standing tall when others try to make you small. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. In our hierarchical structure, it's easy to conflate rank with worth, authority with value. But the most powerful leadership doesn't diminish others to establish control. It elevates others to achieve collective excellence. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Recently, I found myself at a crossroads where dignity and duty seemed to diverge. I chose to honor both by stepping aside rather than stepping down, by serving where my contributions would be valued rather than where my presence would be merely tolerated. The room was utterly still, everyone aware of the unspoken context. That choice revealed a fundamental truth about leadership. True authority doesn't require the diminishment of others. True respect isn't enforced through humiliation. True leadership lifts as it guides, honors as it directs. I looked directly at General Pierce, acknowledging his role in recognizing this truth. As officers, we're entrusted not just with missions and resources, but with the dignity of those we lead. How we handle that trust, whether we elevate or diminish those under our command, defines us more profoundly than any tactical success. I felt the room with me now, the energy shifting from curiosity to engagement. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't confrontation or retaliation, but simply standing in your own integrity, choosing dignity over degradation, allowing truth to reveal itself through your actions rather than your arguments. Several heads nodded, particularly among the female officers present. As we move forward, as an academy, as a service, as leaders, let us remember that our strength lies not in forcing others to be less, but in empowering them to be more. That the measure of our leadership isn't how many people follow our orders, but how many people grow under our guidance. I concluded by looking across the entire gathering, making eye contact with as many as I could. The uniform we wear represents not just the authority we hold, but the responsibility we bear, to lead with integrity, to serve with honor, and to treat every person, regardless of rank or role, with the dignity they deserve. That is our duty. That is our privilege. That is our legacy. The applause that followed wasn't the polite acknowledgement I'd expected, but a genuine response that filled the room and continued long after I'd returned to my seat. Officers I barely knew approached throughout the evening to shake my hand or share their own experiences with leadership, both exemplary and toxic. Near the end of the celebration, Colonel Warren, a senior officer who had witnessed Grayson's humiliating assignment weeks earlier, sought me out. "That was a masterful speech, Captain," he said, his expression unusually solemn. "I owe you an apology." "Sir, I was in that room when Grayson handed you that tray. I saw what was happening and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to intervene, that you could handle it yourself." He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "The truth is, I failed as a leader in that moment. Your words tonight made that very clear." His candor caught me off guard. "We all have moments we wish we'd handled differently, sir." "Indeed," he nodded. "But the true measure is what we do afterward. You chose dignity. I'm choosing accountability. Several of us senior officers are implementing A mentorship program specifically focused on addressing these issues. We'd value your input if you're willing. I'd be honored to contribute, sir. As the evening drew to a close, General Pierce approached once more. Excellent words, Captain. Precisely what this community needed to hear. Thank you, sir. The Pentagon called today, he continued. They're eager for you to begin work on implementing your logistics model. You'll be temporarily assigned to Washington starting next month. The news was both exciting and unexpected. Washington, sir? A significant opportunity, Captain. One I believe you'll handle with the same integrity you've demonstrated here. He offered his hand. The Academy's loss will be the Pentagon's gain, at least for a few months. As I drove home that night, snowflakes danced in my headlights. The evening had unfolded nothing like I'd imagined when I first returned from Florida. Instead of awkwardness or lingering tension, there had been acknowledgement, respect, and a sense of collective movement toward something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. You were amazing tonight. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate your Pentagon assignment? I smiled, typing back, absolutely, though I'll be ordering my own drinks from now on. Her response came immediately. As it should be, Captain. As it should be. 3 months later, I stood at the window of my temporary Pentagon office, watching cherry blossoms dance in the spring breeze. Washington, D.C. sprawled before me, a city of power and purpose so different from the rugged beauty of Colorado. My time here had been intense but rewarding. The logistics efficiency model I'd developed had been implemented across 3 major commands, with preliminary results exceeding even the most optimistic projections. Senior officers who had initially viewed me with skepticism now sought my input on expanding the program further. My desk phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Captain Lawson speaking. Rachel, it's Jennifer Riley. The general's aide had become something of a mentor during my Pentagon assignment. Do you have a minute? Of course. Just got word that the investigation into Grayson's conduct has concluded, she said without preamble. Thought you'd want to know. I sat down, a complex mix of emotions stirring within me. I had deliberately avoided seeking information about Grayson's fate, focusing instead on my own path forward. But I couldn't deny a certain curiosity. What's the verdict? Formal reprimand, sensitivity training, and reassignment to a support role at Andrews. No command positions for the foreseeable future. I absorbed this information in silence. Not the career-ending punishment some might have expected, but significant. Consequences nonetheless. You're very quiet, Jennifer observed. Just processing, I said. I never wanted to destroy him, you know. I just wanted to be treated with respect. And that's exactly why this outcome is right, she replied. It's proportionate, corrective rather than punitive, a chance for him to learn rather than simply suffer. After hanging up, I returned to the window, watching. A formation of aircraft pass overhead. The news about Grayson brought a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction or vindication, just completion of a chapter I was ready to move beyond. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I smiled when I saw the sender, Colonel Diane Reeves, my ally from the Florida Veterans Event. We had maintained regular correspondence since my promotion, her mentorship becoming increasingly valuable as I navigated new responsibilities. Her message was brief but significant. Rachel, spoke with General Pierce today. The Academy's Leadership Ethics program is being expanded. They want you to develop and lead a new module on dignity and authority when you return from D.C. A chance to formalize what you've already taught through example. Call me to discuss. Diane. I read the message twice, its implications settling into place like puzzle pieces completing a picture. This wasn't just an assignment. It was an opportunity to transform a personal experience into institutional change, to ensure that future officers would understand what Grayson had not, that true leadership elevates rather than diminishes. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Colonel James Martinson, my Pentagon supervisor, entered with a folder in hand. Captain, got a minute? The Joint Chiefs want a briefing on your logistics model next week. I need you to prepare the presentation. Of course, sir. Any specific areas they want to focus on? He handed me the folder. The resource allocation algorithms primarily. And, Captain, he paused. Something uncharacteristically personal in his expression. They specifically requested you present it yourself. Your reputation precedes you. After he left, I opened the folder and began reviewing the requirements, my mind already organizing the key points. This was what I had wanted all along, to be valued for my work, my intellect, my contributions, not dismissed or diminished based on preconceptions. That evening, I took a rare moment of leisure, walking along the National Mall as sunset painted the monuments in gold. My phone rang, Grace calling from Colorado. "How's the Pentagon treating my favorite captain?" she asked. "Busy but good," I replied, watching tourists pose for photos before the Lincoln Memorial. "Just heard about Grayson today." "Ah," she said. "Not surprised they didn't throw the book at him. Does it bother you?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about correction and growth. If he learns from this, that's better than simply being penalized." "Look at you, all wise and magnanimous," Grace teased, "though I still wouldn't mind if he had to serve drinks at the next banquet." I laughed, appreciating her loyalty. "How are things at the Phi Academy?" "Different," she said. "Better, I think. General Pierce has been implementing changes. The recording of that meeting with Grayson became a case study in the ethics seminar. Anonymous, of course, but everyone knows." "And how about you? Still dating that tactical officer from the 10th Squadron?" "Actually, no," she said, her tone brightening. "I'm seeing someone new. Major David Chen from Intelligence. He's different, respectful, sees me as an equal. I'm happy for you, Grace. He asked about you, actually. Said your speech at the holiday celebration changed how he approaches leadership with his team. You've had quite an impact, Rachel." After we hung up, I continued my walk, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. From that moment of humiliation with a silver tray, to briefing the Joint Chiefs. From being told to serve drinks to developing leadership ethics curriculum. Not because I had fought or demanded or exposed, but because I had chosen dignity, had stepped aside rather than stepped down, had allowed truth to reveal itself through the contrast between integrity and arrogance. A school group passed by, young teenagers on a field trip, their energy and potential palpable. Among them were girls who might one day wear the uniform, serve their country, face their own challenges. I hoped the path would be smoother for them, not because obstacles had been removed, but because they would be better equipped to navigate them with dignity. My Pentagon assignment would end in 2 weeks. I would return to Colorado, to the academy, to new responsibilities that included shaping future leaders. The prospect filled me with purpose and peace. As darkness fell over Washington, the monuments illuminated against the night sky, I remembered my father's words once more. True honor isn't about the medals on your chest. It's about standing tall when others try to make you small. I had stood tall, not by fighting or shouting or demanding, but by quietly choosing my own path, by refusing to be diminished, by serving with integrity even when others tried to reduce me to less than I was. And in that choice, that simple, quiet insistence on dignity, I had found not just personal vindication, but a platform for meaningful change. Not just a promotion, but a purpose. The banquet hall had been empty that night in December, but my heart was full now, with conviction, with clarity, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to simply stand in your truth and let it speak for itself. Because in the end, dignity isn't granted by others or taken away by their actions. It's an internal compass that guides your choices even when the path is difficult. It's standing tall not by making others small, but by refusing to be made small yourself. That is the lesson I would carry forward. That is the legacy I would leave. That is the honor in silence.